Start day 2 of our recording at home with lethal injection. Since all our volleyball players left us, they're going to need this. Okay, so let's talk about what happens, and then we'll show you a little bit of a movie clip here, okay? All right, so lethal injection, as we said, is only used in the United States. It's not used anywhere else in the world. It involves a continuous IV injection of a short-acting barbiturate in combination with a chemical paralyzing agent. You know, paralyzing, stopping your body. It's similar, actually, this is kind of scary, but it's similar to a general anesthetic that you get when you go into surgery, but it's just at a bigger dose. So when you're put under for surgery, the same thing, except a lot more. But, like I said, the drugs are injected in fatal amounts instead of the amount just to put you to sleep. To make sure that it's the right amount. Yep, because that's kind of important. Okay, so now let me show you the next slide, because there's a whole bunch of steps to this. All right, so it starts over here. So first, intravenous line is inserted, and a doctor or nurse or EMT monitors the prisoner. Then the staff prepares 15 injections that they put into your IV, 11 with lethal chemicals, and 4 with saline solution, because you have to flush it with saline solution after, okay? So they have 1.25 grams of thiopental, then saline, then potassium chloride, then pancurium bromide. So this tells you what each of them does. All right, so pancurium bromide is the muscle relaxant, and this is what paralyzes your diaphragm and stops the lungs from breathing. It paralyzes the lungs, okay? The second one is thiopental. This is the barbiturate and gentle anesthetic, and this is the one that makes them unconscious, so they're not awake when it happens. And the potassium chloride is a halide salt, and that is what stops the heart. So they had to have 2 things. You have to have one that stops the breathing and one that stops the heart. So that's why they use those 3 things. Okay, so then they get all those ready. Then 5 grams or 4 syringes of thiopental, this one that makes them unconscious, are injected, followed by saline solution. Then 5 more grams and more solution are added if that does not make them unconscious, because obviously what makes him unconscious would not make me unconscious, because I'm a lot bigger. You know what I mean? I weigh more than you do. Okay? So then they take 60 milligrams of pancurium bromide, injected into the prisoner, followed by 1 saline solution. So the next one then is the muscle relaxant, and that is what's trying to stop the diaphragm and the lungs from going in and out. And then you have the 5th one over here on the right. Both syringes of potassium chloride, are injected into the prisoner, followed by saline solution, and that is what stops the heart. So that's kind of the order that things go in. All right? It's a lot of injections, isn't it? Seems like it would take forever. So some believe that it's more humane than what we've seen. Hanging, electric chair, no, I could see that. Others point to these problems. There are certain medical conditions that make the body react differently to the medications, which causes problems. So what might stop my breathing might not stop someone else's breathing. Also, they've had trouble with scarred veins, especially if they were an intravenous drug user. So they might not be able to get a vein. I know I have a terrible time just because my veins like to roll. I don't know if any of you are like that. But so sometimes they have to put it in between the toes or wherever. It freaks me out anyway because I don't like that stuff. And they've actually had to cut into a vein sometimes to get in there. Okay? Well, like you said, don't commit a murder if you don't want that to happen. This was actually introduced in Oklahoma and Texas in 1977. And it is probably the most used in the United States. So let's show you, we're going to show you a clip from the movie Dead Man Walking, and then someone checked it out last night. Who was it? Tom checked it out. Have you watched it yet? So it's a really interesting movie, and it kind of shows, now it plays with your emotions. Because on one side, this guy obviously did a horrible crime. But then it's from the perspective of a nun who's going in and trying to communicate with him and hopefully get him to commit to God, blah, 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 okay? And she walks him to the very end of his life. And it shows the process of how it happens. Yeah. Might have been. I bet it is based on Sister Prejean. I bet it is. I didn't put that together. That makes sense, though. Okay, so let's show you the end, anyway. Yeah, the concern is that they're paralyzed because of the paralyzing agent, but it hasn't completely knocked them out, so they can feel what's happening and they're suffocating. So like I said, it would be like putting a bag over somebody's head and suffocating them. Yeah.
So why don't they just add on an extra dose of stuff to knock them out?
I don't think they always know. You know, I don't know if any of you had issues with surgery where you like woke up in the middle of surgery. I've had that happen. Have you? Oh, he does anesthesia? Yeah. Yeah, I actually woke up in the middle of one once and it was not pretty. Yeah. Yeah. Well, because they were doing this thing that put a tube down my throat to look into my pancreas. And I woke up and I was gagging because there was a tube this big down my throat. I was like, then they knocked me out and gave me more. But, you know, you never know for sure how much everybody needs. You do it based on what they weigh and how tall they are, but everybody's a little different. Just like Tylenol might knock him out, but for me, I need 3 to get pain relief. So, or, yeah, so in that case, they give you too much. And if you give way too much, it can kill you, right? So it's a really touchy subject. Yeah, Amanda. Because you'd be awake. I mean, think about someone that has a heart attack and how they act when they have a heart attack. They're like, oh, you know what I mean? So you would see all the suffering. That's why they want to knock them out first so you don't see the suffering and hopefully they don't feel it. That's the goal anyway. JP?
Would it really hurt to give them too much, though? Like, if they're going to die anyway?
Would it hurt to give them too much? Probably not at this case, no.
Like, can you just add on an extra dose and just knock them out and
And make sure that they're knocked out. Yeah, and I suppose they've kind of learned over time, but everybody's a little different, you know.
Even if you
So.
give them too much, like they wouldn't feel getting killed that way anyway.
Right. So it's better to err on that side than the other. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I tried to like put like some gel on my eyes or something like that, and it was like this weird like stuff. And like when the nurse, like, and I was out, but then when I woke up, the nurse like got it off. I was like I totally woke up. They still put like the needle in. I had
Right.
surgery.
Uh-huh.
They put it like underneath my nose, and like they numbed like the whole nose.
Right.
Put it underneath my eyes, like my eyes like didn't close.
The gel was something to do with keeping your eyes closed? Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard about that. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I've never had that happen myself. So it's kind of a touchy subject. Do I think this is more humane than probably some of the others? Probably. As long as it's done right, you know? Yeah, Amanda?
Okay, back to like the question that I asked earlier. Why would they be like suffering if they're already knocked out?
If they're knocked out, they're fine.
Like,
The
why
problem
would they
is,
sedate them
why what?
and then like it's like to stop the heart before the
Because then you see all the flailing and the suffering. Well, unconscious has to come first. Absolutely. But paralyzing then makes sure that you don't move your body because, you know, even if you knock them out, but you stop breathing, I'm assuming there could be some movement or something like that. So it's designed to paralyze you. The problem is, if they're paralyzed, they can't always say, oh my gosh, I can feel what's happening, you know. You know, it's kind of a weird situation, but now at least you know a little more about the 3 levels and what they're doing. You know, a lot of people don't even know that. So, okay, so let's take a look at our next method. Let's look at the gas chamber, which was used a lot in the earlier days and now not so much. But there was one state that's actually looking at adding it again. So let's talk about this one. So if you look at the picture here, you'll see the gas chamber. It's a little chamber. It's a tiny little chamber. The prisoner is secured to a chair in the center, just like you saw in the last clip, in an airtight chamber. Obviously, you don't want it leaking because then it affects people around there. A stethoscope is strapped to his or her chest, which is then connected to earpieces in the witness's room so they can monitor the progress to see that he or she has died. And then cyanide gas. Remember, where did we use cyanide? Holocaust. Yeah. Cyanide gas is then released in the chamber and it poisons the prisoner as they inhale. We use that in the Holocaust, yes. Death in this case is caused by asphyxiation, suffocation, basically. Okay?
Would that be considered not humane because that's still like you're suffocating them?
Yes.
When you get hanged, isn't it like supposed to happen like instantly?
Right.
And so that doesn't like this seems way more inhumane than
Yeah. And a lot of people have got away from it. However, now that certain drug companies don't want to be associated with lethal injection, like you'll see in this little clip I'm going to show you, there is a state that's considering going back to this because they can't get a hold of the medications they need to use lethal injection. I don't remember. It'll say it. No, not South Dakota. I would remember that. But yeah, ma'am.
I don't get how this isn't considered cruel and everything, but it takes so long. It takes like the video that watched that it takes like 47 minutes to get that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, check this out. Yeah. So although unconsciousness can follow rapidly, the process obviously will take longer if the prisoner holds their breath or they breathe slowly. You know, obviously if I just go, and it fills into my lungs and it happens quicker, but obviously your reaction when you see gas is to hold your breath, right? Because no one wants to die. That's your initial reaction. And even though the prisoner may be unconscious, their vital organs can continue to function for a short time. And you will see there have been cases where people have banged their head against the chair. All kinds of crazy stuff has happened. They're fighting it. They're fighting the gas.
I think, however, the way that person killed someone is how they should die. Like,
They should die the same way they
like, you know,
murdered someone?
Yeah, you know how the 4 guys raped a 11-year-old girl and shoved panties down her throat?
Yeah.
Like, you should get creative.
They should die the same way. Well, and Zach, there are a lot of people that would agree with you, but according to our guarantee of our rights in this country, it says that is cruel and unusual punishment. So, absolutely. So, do we want to be as evil as them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, for example, when Jimmy Lee Gray was executed on September 2nd, 1983, he reportedly had convulsions for 8 minutes and gasped 11 times, striking his head repeatedly on a pole behind him until it was all bloody. Witnesses were then asked to leave the witness room at that point because it was not going like they had planned.
So did he die from the gas or hitting his head?
I assume it was from the gas, but it definitely took a while. So let me show you this state that is discussing adding the gas. By just the use of his words, you can tell he's a little bit against the death penalty. And if you look at this, he's even making fun of it by saying, Missouri to pass gas. Get it? Okay. Did you catch that? So he was making fun of them. Oh, shush, dude. So for those of you that were home, what was the state that is thinking about adding it? Missouri is the answer, yes. Missouri. And the reason was because, again, this drug, propofol, whatever that was, is not allowed, they don't want it to be used for lethal injection anymore. So, yeah, kind of interesting. All right, so let's talk about beheadings a little bit. Not used in the U.S., but it definitely is used around the world. And it has affected us the last few years since we've been fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, this method is typically used in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Yemen, and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And it includes severing the head from the body with a sword, of course. Death is caused by the sharp blade cutting quickly through the spinal cord, causing unconsciousness from shock to the spinal cord. I don't know if you realize that. That's what causes it. Because typically, if you think about a beheading, they come from the back to the front, right? So it hits the spinal cord first. So it should kill you from spinal cord shock. Yeah. Yeah, and if that's the case, it may happen differently because I'm assuming then it would affect your breathing first because it hits your windpipe. So that may be a little different. But if they do it typical, it's from.
Is it that easy to go through there? Like the bullet go just slice it right in half.
Well, it needs to be a very, very sharp-edged sword, and that was one of the problems. You know, if you've had world history with me, we've talked about that a little. They got rid of it, and they got the guillotine because sometimes the executioner would be drunk, and he would miss and hit like the head or the shoulder, or would go halfway and get caught and have to pull back out and hit again to get through the neck, you know. And you think about, like I tell my world history kids, have you ever taken a knife and tried to cut through like a chicken bone? Have you ever sawed through a chicken bone with a steak knife? Try it sometime. It's not easy. It really isn't. Or a steak bone. And then imagine your spinal cord. I mean, that's a very thick bone when you think about it, right? So the sharper the blade, the faster the execution. And it's not always easy. So that's kind of the key there.
They wouldn't wipe off the guillotine.
Right.
Remember this.
Right, yes. Right. Now, like I said, although it is intended that death comes quickly, several blows may be needed because the sword is a light tool, and it also depends on the strength and accuracy of the executioner, which is why they got rid of it in the first place way back in the old days. Now, what's interesting about this is in past Asian culture, this was reserved as an honorable thing. If you remember, we talked about, you know, the samurai, for example, that if you were a samurai warrior, they would rather be beheaded than to be captured as a prisoner. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. As a prisoner. So here we're in World War II, and these Japanese soldiers are executing our guys, and we're thinking how inhumane. Which, yes, it was. And in fact, there was a case where these two guys were seeing how many heads they could cut off within 1 minute. And it was in the newspaper. I mean, that's just freaking inhumane. But if you look at the Japanese culture, it was actually more honorable to do that than to surrender. So that's why they treated our POWs so bad, because they said you are dishonorable to even surrender in the first place. You should die for your country, not surrender. So kind of, they look at it a little differently than we do. At least they used to anyway. Okay? Yeah, now, in this case, when I first did these notes, that was the year we were getting some of those YouTube clips, and they were beheading our people over in Iraq. Do you guys remember any of those? Like May of 2004, they beheaded American civilian Nick Berg in Iraq by Al-Qaeda, right? And they did it right on YouTube. Now, YouTube got it off as quickly as they could, but Al-Qaeda really likes to show examples of killing Americans as much as possible. And so obviously I'm not going to show any kind of video like that. That would be totally inhumane. But as you know, this affects us. I mean, we know that we have reporters that are getting captured on the job, and they're being beheaded because they want to show this is what we do to Americans. So it's kind of a sad deal. Now, believe it or not, we still have stoning in the world. This is a really sad story. So if you look at this picture here, this is an Iranian woman at a protest in Brussels highlighting the barbarity of stoning, in which women are then buried up to their necks in front of a crowd of volunteers, and they are killed in a hail of rocks. And there are rules about this. So let's check it out. First of all, the prisoner is buried to the neck or restrained. Death is caused by damage to the brain, asphyxiation, or a combination of the injuries, depending on what gets hit by the rocks. Most of the time, it's brain damage first, which means you're still breathing, but you have brain damage, which is not a fun way to go, right? Because a person may sustain severe blows without losing consciousness, the death can be very slow. In Iran, one of 6 countries which prescribes stoning by law, it stipulates that death cannot come from one single blow. So you couldn't have Drew bring a big rock that's the size of my head and just go bam and kill me just like that. It has to be more than one blow. It's the law. You can't. It's not allowed. You'd be in big trouble. But get this. This is what just drives me crazy. Okay. So Article 119 of the Islamic Penal Code says, in the punishment of stoning to death, The stones should not be too large so that the person dies on being hit by just one or two of them. They should not be so small either that they could not be defined as a stone.
I'd rather stick those on wood.
Yeah, obviously, but they want to make sure that you feel this for a while. So if you talk about an eyewitness reporting to a stoning, they said the lorry deposited a large number of stones and pebbles beside the waste ground, and then two women were led to the spot wearing white and with sacks over their heads. So usually they would put sacks over their heads. They were enveloped in a shower of stones and were transformed into two red bloody sacks. The wounded women fell to the ground, and Revolutionary Guards and smashed their heads in with a shovel, I believe it says down below. So they finally put them to death at the end there. So there is a movie out right now that has won huge awards. It's called The Stoning of Soroya M., and we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Messages for Ozzy Howard.